Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from and when you're joining us. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am so happy to be back with you for another episode of the BGC Book Club. So please come on in the room, invite your friends. Go ahead, like and share all of those things so that we can make sure as many people as possible are able to tap into this conversation. So I'm coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, which is not too far from where the woman we'll be talking about tonight is from. And so it's just indeed an honor, as always, to bring wonderful stories, whether they're fictional or non-fictional, just to really explore Black women and Black women writers. So tonight is no exception. We are going to be talking about the one and only Toni Morrison and the book Toni at Random, the iconic writer's legendary editorship. So our special guest, the author of this book, is Dana A. Williams, who is a professor of African American literature and dean of the graduate school at Howard University, the HU. She is the former president of the College Language Association and the Modern Languages Association, and is the author of In the Light of Likeness, Transformed the Literary Art of Leon Forrest. She is also the editor of several books, and her work has been featured in many prestigious journals, and her research has been supported by the Ford Foundation, the John Franklin Humanities Institute, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. She co-directs the Center for Medical Humanities and Health Justice and is an Mellon Foundation-funded collaboration between Howard and Georgetown Universities. That's a lot. I'm getting tongue-tied saying all of it, but the most important thing is that she's here tonight to talk to us about this beautiful book about Toni Morrison. So without any further delay, let's welcome Dana A. Williams to BGC Book Club for the first time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Yes, it is indeed an honor, a pleasure, all of the above to have you here. So first and foremost, I just want to congratulate you on this book, Toni at Random. It's been getting all kinds of buzz, all kinds of awards, all kinds of accolades, because so many of us are lovers of Toni Morrison and her work. So to be able to learn more about her is quite an honor for us. And congratulations to you for all of the things that are happening because of this book.
Thank you. I'm excited about it. It is a labor of love. It took a while for it to get out, but I'm excited that it's in the world and that it's, in readers' hands. Just really excited.
Yes. So first, I just want to ask you, what was it that led you to even want to talk about Toni Morrison? Not so much the books that she wrote, but more so the other books that she helped to birth into the world through her editorship. What was it that led you to even want to tell this particular story?
Well, if I'm being honest, it was really about Toni Morrison's fiction, even to begin with, right?
Okay.
So it was a class that I took with Eleanor Traylor that was examining studies in the African-American narrative. And it was that kind of contemporary African-American literature focusing on fiction, especially. And we were reading Leon Forrest, Gail Jones, Toni Cade Bambara, John McCluskey, and oh gosh, I'm forgetting someone. Gail Jones, Leon Forrest, Toni Cade, McCluskey, and Henry Dumas.
Okay, yes.
Who Morrison edited, of course, even after he had transitioned. And I was really interested in putting Morrison in conversation with those writers when I learned that the reason that those writers in particular had been chosen was because they had been writers that she had edited. And I thought, wait a minute, there's something to be considered here. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wanted to think about her as a fiction writer in relation to this contemporary African-American fiction that I was reading. And then it made sense. That was almost an aha moment that she had edited them, because I could see a kind of through line, if you will, really just a very strong interest in the interior lives of Black people, as opposed to who we were in relation to someone else. I mean, it was almost like, reading these books allowed you to eavesdrop on all of the conversations that were incredibly familiar in Black spaces. So I then began to think about books that were not a part of the fiction, that grouping that I had initially begun to think about. And the more I talked to Morrison about the project overall, the more I realized that it had to be about something more than the fiction. I mean, honestly, though, I started out thinking about it as fiction. And when she wouldn't talk to me about the fiction, I was like, okay, let's see. And I don't think she was doing it intentionally, outside of the fact that I also think she was editing me in her own way.
Right.
But I was just pushing, and then it just got more and more interesting. And when you have a compelling storyteller like Toni Morrison, even as she's not answering the questions that I had prepared, that I had sent in advance, she's such a compelling storyteller that I just kept listening and I kept getting engaged. And then finally, in an aha moment that she was like, yeah, it took you a minute to get there, but you're there now. I was like, you know what? I think this is about more than the fiction.
Yeah.
I think I was the only person in the room who was surprised.
Well, you just hit on something, because you just said you actually were talking to Toni Morrison. We skipped all over that. So
Yeah.
yes, you were inspired to write it, right? But it was through having conversations with her.
Yes, I admit completely to having the good fortune of like an insider's opportunity to interact with her. So my dissertation advisor, my mentor, still a person who's very dear to me, Eleanor Traylor, was and just continued to be very close with Toni Morrison. They both taught at Howard together, in the early years, and remained steadfast friends. And we all know how important it is in a network of Black women to have someone vouch for you.
Absolutely.
So essentially, she said, she's saying she's all right. She knows what she's doing. She's done her due diligence. She knows the field. I mean, it was my command of Leon Forrest, actually, that made Morrison kind of raise an eyebrow to say, you know a lot about this writer that most people don't talk about. Like, you might be somebody who I can give this story to. She was, obviously very interested in talking about the editorship. Had a tremendous amount of pride for the work that she did, and would say, it was really hard and nobody talks about it. So
right.
when the moment that she said, if there's anything I can do to help, well, then I jumped on it.
I know that's right. Because that's one thing, it's a story that many of us, I mean, I've said it here. We know that Toni Morrison, was writing while she was editing, and you will say, oh, she'd get up early in the morning, she was raising her kids. We know that story. Mm-hmm. About how she was juggling both for a season of her life, as well as being a parent, a single parent at that. But we don't often necessarily talk about what she was editing, what she was working on. Yes. So this really helped us. For those who've had a chance to read it, and if you haven't yet, I highly recommend it. It's a chance for us to see what was it that she was working on betwixt and between writing her own stuff.
Yes. So much of it was it turned on that idea that there needed to be a record. That was one thing that was a kind of resonant thing that we heard her say often, that in this moment of civil rights, in this moment of protest, that there would be people in the streets and everyone couldn't be in the streets, and that wouldn't necessarily last. You couldn't stay in the streets forever, but there would still need to be a record of what was happening in that moment. And part of her work as an editor was really to kind of chronicle what that work was. From Angela Davis, Toni Cade Bambara, who had published short stories in a number of places, but who had never had a collection of her own. She had, of course, edited The Black Woman, which was huge. It was everywhere. Everybody had copies of that book. Yet there wasn't a single book that focused on Bambara's work exclusively. June Jordan at one point with the poetry, Lucille Clifton with poetry and with her memoir. I mean, I could go on and on. Muhammad Ali, of course.
Yes.
Just so many really incredible writers. Huey P. Newton, Boris Bitker's The Case for Black Reparations. And then, of course, Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus, including cookbooks, including like books that were scrapbooks, because we did all know, I think, I won't say we all knew, but because I didn't even really understand it completely. I knew that she had done the Black Book, but I didn't know what it meant to have done the Black Book,
Right. Right. So, yes, I mean, it's wide ranging, which is pretty spectacular in and of itself, her as an editor, and things that were academic as well, because that's something that I definitely didn't realize. But then it kind of makes sense, even when you look at her own personal works, that, she was brilliant and she had to research and she had to do certain things. So really, when she started out as an editor, she was focused more on academic books.
Yeah, because she started as an editor at a textbook company, small company in Syracuse called L.W. Singer.
Mhm.
So she was really hired at Singer because she had an academic background. She had taught at Howard for 7 years, and before coming back to Howard as a faculty member, because she had gone there as an undergraduate, she had taught at Texas Southern in Houston. So part of the attraction to her for that company was that she had this academic background. So the first book that she edited, Contemporary African Fiction, was in fact a textbook. But even that was clear about the importance of the moment. We saw Black independence movements all over Africa
Yes.
in the late 60s, early 70s. And part of what she wanted to be able to do was to put together in one volume a lot of the writing, the essays, the poetry, some excerpts from plays, some excerpts from novels, but certainly a lot of fiction of African writers, because there was just a tremendous amount of celebration and energy around Black independence movements. And
Right.
that had to inform really liberation movements in the US.
Hmm. And to think that at the time she's doing this, this is like the late 60s, early 70s, when she's kind of falling into that space. So it's like the Black Power movement is a thing at that time.
Absolutely. And that's part of the attraction to so many of the writers, but she was also still with one foot in and out of academia because she would teach from time to time. But the way that she gets contemporary African literature is she's at the University of Wisconsin because there are protests all over the campus and students are
Right.
saying, we want Black studies. So she's
Hmm.
involved in those Black studies movements, really helping us to think about how to communicate the Black Panthers and that tradition. So she edits the volume by Huey P. Newton to bring that to a mainstream audience in a way that really revealed the complexity of that organization and the complexity of Huey P. Newton's thinking. Even, I think, kind of reflectively, most people don't think about those organizers as incredibly brilliant, like
Mm,
philosophical thinkers,
right.
not people who were, and that's something of a challenge that we see kind of contemporarily. Like they're all really rooted in a philosophy of kind of political orientation. We know that to be true for Angela Davis, but people still don't talk a whole lot about Angela Davis as when she's jailed, she's a PhD student and
Right.
had actually already been teaching in the philosophy department. So it was also important for Morrison to be clear that these were really sophisticated thinkers who were informed by traditions that they were trying to bring into a contemporary moment.
Hmm. That is so true. And bringing it, the African part of it in as well, showing that
Yes.
some of these things, this isn't, we're not new to this, we're true to this, so to speak. So there are
Yes.
African intellectuals, and, we carry, that within our DNA to want to, to do the same thing, to share through our art, through our literature, through using our voice and our words. So I love that all of that is called all encapsulated in the work that not only that she wrote, but that she helped others to bring out into the world. And
Yep.
I'm just thinking in my head though, because you're saying this is at the time when people were clamoring for Black studies. And
Mm-hmm.
she was helping people to, get that work out into the world so it could be studied at, these institutions of higher learning, not just HBCUs, but more broadly. And in my head, as I was reading that, I'm like, I wonder what she would think now.
Boy, I tell you, and that's part of what I'm thinking about as I read these essays. I know I have some very clear ideas about what she would think about American democracy. A lot of her fiction and her essays really begin to challenge national myths. That's the work that she does in Playing in the Dark with those essays. Like, what does it mean to create yourself on the basis of not being a Native American or not being Black? Like, what is American identity if it is not, I'm not the other?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there's also a kind of interrogation of that in A Mercy. What is this space before it becomes known as the United States of America or North America? And then, of course, Paradise completely plays with the notion of American exceptionalism and critiques it very overtly. So her
Mm-hmm.
own fiction and her own essays will do it, but she's also really interested in making sure that those writers who are interrogating American myths are able to be published as well, that they
Mm-hmm.
don't just fall in the margins, that they aren't on the outskirts of kind of contemporary thought, but they're like really at the center. And that was one of the things that the way that she described it was from margin to center. Like she said, all the interesting stuff's happening at the margins. It's not happening in the center. So I wanted to bring the margin to the center.
Yes. I
And
love
not
that.
necessarily like as like this thing to be observed or this voyeuristic kind of moment, but because if there were really going to be changes to improve the way that we think about American democracy and American nationalism or an American ideal, then oftentimes it would come through the interrogation of the self in ways that Black writers were uniquely poised to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But she didn't also always work with just Black writers. I found that interesting as well. Knowing her as we know her, and again, and hearing some of the bites and sound clips that that we've heard over the years, where she's talking about, not writing for the white gaze and all those sorts of things. It doesn't mean that she never worked with white writers, but the ones that she worked with, she was very even strategic in how she did that.
Yeah, I would agree. So I'm thinking of Boris Bitker's book on the case for Black reparations, for instance. Bitker was a white attorney from Yale who had done a number of academic pieces that made the argument that there was a legal case that could be made for reparations long before we began the kind of contemporary conversation. And to be clear, it's not isolated, right? Like, I don't know that there's ever been a time when Black people didn't talk about reparations. The first petition by Belinda in the late 1800s, late 1700s, early 1700s, Belinda says y'all owe me a pension.
I know that's right.
Like, literally. For the work that I have been able to do. So there's never been a moment where we weren't clear that our labor deserved compensation. But James Forman had made the case as a Black man in Riverside Baptist Church, and it wasn't taken seriously on its merits because he interrupted a service. So Bitker says, we need to bring this out of a quote unquote ghetto and as this kind of fringe thing, as though it's not something that legal scholars are genuinely talking about. Right. And so she then helps him to translate from, legalese, where 1/3 of the page is narrative and 3/4 of the page is like footnote for legal scholars. Right. Says, no, we can't do that. We have to translate it in a way to make this case so that we can have a public conversation about it. To begin to think about where the precedence is. And there were a number of other writers for whom that was similarly the case. She worked with William Hinton for quite some time on Asia and Sinn Féin. But even those, again, were really pushing notions of how we really understood what we had long held as sacred truths, things that we thought that we knew. When she works with writers like Betty Weiser, or she's thinking about America's working women. Part of that is to make sure that the big conversation about America's working women, which is traditionally white, includes Black women who never had the option not to work, to be clear. Like, there was never a situation where there seemed to have been some moment where we had to advocate for ourselves as people who were employed. Our advocacy was pay me for my labor. Yeah.
Right. Because the woman who is able to stay at home, that's a rarity. That's the exception for me. That's not so much the rule. But just in thinking about, we're talking about the people that she worked with. I do want to take a little bit of time just to talk about what it really means to even be an editor, because there are folks who might not even have a real inclination as to what a person does as an editor. We might think that it's just, we're just going in and we're marking it up and telling you where to move this and where to put that. But her role encompassed so much more than just that.
I think that was probably the part that was most revealing to me, just understanding the whole process. Because I think I probably thought about it as somehow the book magically ended up on her desk, and then she worked with the folks to tell the best story or to make sure that the paragraphs were coherent. But learning really about the process of really identifying an idea, looking for the writer who could execute that idea, working with that writer to ensure that that writer got a contract, that you set up, like, what's the premise? How are we going to market this book? How am I going to even convince my editor-in-chief to take this book on? And one quick little side note, Random House was one of the few houses that continued to allow an editor to take a book directly to the editor-in-chief. Everybody else had to go by committee. And imagine being the only Black woman in a room, as Marie Brown was at Doubleday, for instance, for so many years. And you had to convince 8, 9, 10, 11 other people that this book that you could see and could vision out was something that the firm should pick up. Morrison didn't have to do that. She could take it directly to her editor-in-chief and say, I got this book by Toni Cade Bambara. She's been published in a number of women's magazines. She's an incredible short story writer. So I want to publish her. That was really the starting point for the editor, trying to convince someone that this is a book that is viable and that has an audience. And then you got to figure out again how to tell the story. And it doesn't even end there. You push it on over to publicity and sales, and you got to make the case about why you should buy ads for this book. What should those ads say? What should the editorial fact sheet say? And she would even work with the design team to make decisions about what the book should look like. Who would do the design? Where should the author's name appear? And who did you need to get to blurb the book? Because she never wanted to send the book out naked. She would then have to say, all right, here's my kind of group of folks who I want to help make sure that this book gets the attention that it does, because blurbing a book obviously helps with an unknown writer. It helps the reader begin to say, this person thinks that this is a good book. This person is promoting this book. Maybe I should take a look at it. It was a lot.
It's a lot. So,
you got to take the authors to lunch. You got to or you got to work with the author to say, no, this idea isn't working. Let's think about like what's most important. And in the case of Angela Davis, for instance, she actually had to convince Angela Davis to write the book.
To even write the book to begin with. Yes, I had no idea. And I don't know how different it might be now, or, if it depends on which house a person is working, publishing house a person is working for. But I'm like, that's a lot, that's a lot more than just, coming in with your pen and let's move this around. That's a whole lot more.
It is. And I think it's even like contemporarily, like now, I'm really interested in talking to editors now who are saying that so much of what Morrison experienced resonates, like even in this moment, especially the invisible labor parts of it. But then I think they have even more responsibility than she would have had, because now instead of 12 editors working on a particular thing, there's 6. So you have manuscripts double the amount that she would have had to work with. There are more people who are trying to write now than were then. So you also have to try to manage, how do I identify the next voice while also making sure that I am still commercially viable. And Morrison was, she had that at front of mind all the time too. She had a profit and loss statement close by for the most part whenever she was thinking about something, because she knew I can do one book that sells and makes enough money so that I can take a chance on another book that may or may not. Yeah. So there's a lot of juggling and strategizing that has to go on.
Right. So it's not just, it's the art of, the written word and how you put it together, but then there's also the business side of it.
Absolutely. And some of that has to do with personality. Some of it has to do with being compelling enough and building enough of a relationship with the folks that you're working with to convince them, yep, let's take a chance on this book. This is something that we know that we can do. I mean, I'm telling you, so many variables now. Like, does a person have an audience already? Like, what's the credibility of the person? Is this book going to be a critical success? What might it bring to the house? Because again, another difference was if it were a critical success, even if it didn't make that much money, it would bring enough attention to the house that they would be interested in it now. I don't think they don't care as much now about the critical success. It's just like, is this commercially viable?
Right. The bottom line is a dollar sign, basically.
Yeah. And that gets complicated because it then means that there is a kind of formula. And if it doesn't fit the formula, then it almost doesn't stand a chance. And most editors aren't interested in the formula.
That's something to think about, because I just know, just in the 5 years, almost 6 years that I've been doing this, I see certain types of books being put out, maybe more than I did in the past. And it leads me to think that, people are looking like, oh, these things are selling. there's this formula, so let's go with this because that's what's hot and that's what's selling, versus maybe taking a chance on something that looks a little bit different.
Yep. And I think that's part of what made Morrison unique, even in that moment. Part of what she was trying to do was to say, or she was clear. And I'm not convinced that other editors weren't clear about it either, but she really acted on it, that the reading audience can dictate what should be published. It shouldn't be the opposite way. The editor shouldn't feed you and make you think this is what you want. You have to pay attention to what's going on around and figure out, this is a hole that I know the reading audience needs to be filled. So let me go fill this hole. And you got to be able to do that 2 years before a book comes out. Because it's going to take that long for it to come out. So there are editors everywhere right now trying to figure out, what are people going to want or need 2 years from now? And then you got to contract that thing, hope people like keep their deadlines, and oh gosh, deadlines are impossible. That's part of what we see in this book, that everybody missed the deadline. And I, of course, missed many a deadline with my own, with this publication myself. As a matter of fact, I got something that's due today, you know.
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm in your way.
No, I can't even blame you. It was due 2 months. I mean, I knew it was due December 1st, many moons ago.
Okay, so it's not on Brown Girl Collective. Okay.
No, Brown Girl Collective is going to spark my interest in like finishing this thing. It's going to help me like corral my thoughts. And so that's the other thing I think that's really important about editors being in community with each other, so that they can really begin to think about, like, what is it that we know the world will need. And there's this opportunity that's a little bit different from media, which is trying to capture things happening in real time. So we have to begin to think about a couple of years from now, even next year, like, what are we going to need to be able to get us through? Yeah.
And that's interesting that you would say that, because sometimes I talk to people and their books are like coming out now, you know, or in that present moment that I'm talking to them. And it's almost like they're psychic, you know, like, how did you know that this is exactly what we were going to need at this time? So I guess there is something, a bit of fortune telling, so to speak, or future.
A good editor is a fortune teller. A good editor is saying, this is what we're going to be able to anticipate. And then obviously it's self-fulfilling in some ways, because everybody's thinking now, for instance, about books that we'll want to read, hopefully at the end of a Trump presidency, right? Or books that we'll want to read a couple of years from now, if, as the founder said, we can't keep the democracy. So as it gets worse, or as we come out of it, everybody will think like, oh, I'm so glad this book is here helping me think through this. So there are some people who are thinking about that now, and the editors who are getting together saying, let's do this. And then every now and then there are situations where a book gets moved up. I remember that's exactly what happened with Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. The book wasn't supposed to come out when it did, but after Michael Brown was killed, the heat of the moment, they moved it up fairly quickly to be able to get it out because the world needed it. But you could see the kind of thing that had been happening along the way that Ta-Nehisi and his editor, Chris, were able to really anticipate. At some point, we're going to have to think about what it means to continue to kill Black people with state-sanctioned violence.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. How do we have that? And how do we change the tide? I was listening to this lecture that Hortense Spillers, the great African-American woman literary critic, especially around feminist Black theory, she was giving this lecture where she was really asking the question about how the North was able to convince the world that slavery needed to end. Like, what was it that converted people away from apathy around enslavement to become abolitionists? So part of what we're trying to think about now is like, how do we get people to stop being passive bystanders when they know that something is morally, ethically bankrupt? How do we move them from doing nothing and saying, well, I didn't have anything to do with it? How do we move them from that to, nope, I must actively participate in ending this atrocity? Yeah.
Right. And that's something that we always have to be, thinking about those sorts of things.
Mhm.
There's a point in the book where actually it's when you're talking about the case for reparations, I believe, that particular book, where you're saying that, oh, well, the book was too late, but really
Yeah.
it was ahead of its time.
Time.
So,
Yep. Mhm. Yep. I mean, and it's like catching lightning in a bottle.
mhm,
Sometimes you can, other times it then becomes the thing, as Morrison said, it becomes the record on which people can build.
mhm,
But it was a little too early for the conversation that we began to have in the 2000s, and it was a little too late behind the James Foreman and the civil rights movement argument.
right, because like we have seen, and this parallels to what we have seen, like the difference between 2020 and maybe 2021 and 2025
Yep.
in terms of publishing and literature and
Oh,
things
it's
like
so painful. It's so painful. 2020, we saw like all kinds of people being promoted. Everybody was clear that they had to have more diversity in publishing. Like there were people who were made head of houses. The awards committees were finally diversified. Because the way that an awards committee works is you have 8 people on the committee. Let's say you have 6 people on the committee. People are making recommendations from publishing houses to critics. And if it's not a diverse population, they don't even know to look for the book. They don't even know that the book is missing. And then if they do see it, then they're thinking like, what is this? And does it really deserve this kind of prize? So we
right.
saw that change in 2020, 2021. By 2020, 2023, everybody who had been promoted had been fired,
Hmm.
or they had moved to another house because what they had hoped to be able to do at one house was not actually happening. We saw like retirements. So I'm not completely hopeless around it because there are still more Black people in publishing than there have ever been,
Absolutely.
but they aren't in all of the key positions and they aren't in any serious amount of volume. One
Mm.
is never enough.
One is never enough. Mm. So thinking about Toni Morrison, and this is a space where we talk a lot about Black women writers,
Mhm.
and you've mentioned several of them already. Well, first and foremost, you and I had this conversation before we came on. Reading this book has really encouraged me to want to dive back into the canon of Black women writers, because there are so many people, including some of the things that Toni wrote, that maybe I read it years ago, or didn't read it at all because I was reading contemporary things, whatever the case may be. But the canon is so important for us to be able to tap back into it and see what our foremothers were writing and things like that. But Toni Morrison had really distinctive relationships with other Black women writers, which I
Mhm.
found powerful, because in a lot of cases you think that person, especially her being a writer as well, like what would that relationship be with, because there's a level of competition or whatever the case may be, but she did not operate in that vein. So that first and foremost I found pretty powerful.
It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. I mean, I found that so moving, and it was almost without fail. I didn't censor what I found in the archive. There were some things that were surprising, but even those I like included, like the relationship with Barbara Chase Rowe, which had its tensions, but which
Mm,
ended up like resolving itself in some ways as well. But the beauty that you saw in those relationships with those women that she had these friendships with, well beyond being their editor, was just incredibly moving. Toni Cade Bambara, who, as Morrison said in describing Bambara when she edited Those Bones Are Not My Child, she was outrageously brilliant, just outrageously brilliant. And they did have a very close relationship with no jealousy, no envy, like very close to each other's siblings, or certainly Toni Cade Bambara and Morrison's sibling Lois, and then Toni Cade Bambara's mother, who dubbed the both of them the two Tonys, like they were like one and the same, right? Yeah.
mhm.
That and just like really, really incredible relationships. There's this point where Toni Cade Bambara writes to Toni Morrison just like, just like a beautiful kind of writer to writer, where she says, I'm writing this story, and this woman in the story keeps trying to take it over, and she keeps dying every 15 or so pages. Like, tell her to lighten up. This is my first novel, this is my first time with it. So the humor. And then at a certain point, when Toni Cade Bambara writes to Toni Morrison that she is just a beautiful agent, she says, it occurs to me I need an agent. I realize, load an awful lot on you, Toni. And while I thoroughly, deeply appreciate your beyond the call of duty support, I mean, damn, TCB, lighten up. Talking about stuff.
Right.
In case you don't know, you are a superb editor. I've just checked off items in the middle of your page 2, the middle of my page 300 and something, and I'm cracking up laughing rather than raving over your shorthand language. Perfect. Thank you, Toni. Really, truly, truly. Like, that's a beautiful relationship.
That is beautiful.
That's like, you can't even fake that. That's just like, I appreciate you, girl, for all that you do. And instead of being mad about what I have to do to editor, I'm cracking up at your notes. And there was this shorthand between them. Morrison talks often about the fact that when Bambara, when they were in the same place editing, and Morrison did like to bring the person either to her home or to her office when you were at those last stages, if she was under the gun. We're talking about those deadlines, right? I can't do this back and forth correspondence with you and wait on this mail to come to the office or come to the house and let's get this done. And with Toni Cade Bambara, she said she would point and grunt, and Bambara would go back upstairs and come back down like in 5 minutes, and she'd have it fixed. And then they'd point and say this, like this whole kind of relationship. And it was something similar, of course, with Angela Davis, whom she then, for instance, connects with Toni Cade Bambara when Davis is going to Atlanta, and she knows that she needs a safe place to land. She says, here's Toni Cade Bambara. I've already told her how you like your popcorn, like, that's like, I'm taking care of you. Mm-hmm. And it was not kind of I am your handler person. It was, we be each other. Yeah.
Right. That's just so powerful, because I have heard that doesn't always necessarily exist.
Yeah. That I think is the case. I think it's the case in part because, and that's to be clear, Morrison did have difficult relationships with some of her writers at points. And so she would often say, all right, now that we've gotten our first spat out of the way, now we can get on with the business of editing. Mm-hmm. And even when she had like really tense relationships, I remember like a letter to Chinwezu, for instance, where Chinwezu's like deeply apologetic. He's hung the phone up in her face. They are arguing about some like intense, like argue intensely. And she says, don't worry, I don't stay mad at people, only institutions. Like, she couldn't take it personally. Because you know how sensitive people are about it's like the Erykah Badu, like, I'm sensitive about ish, right?
Right, exactly.
So sensitive about their stuff. So she understood that, but also said, you got to trust me as an editor. And those writers who didn't trust her as an editor, once she was done with you. Yeah.
Right, that's true. And just thinking about, there's so many thoughts that are going through my head, but one that's really coming to the forefront right now is that she really is that literary midwife who's helping them to birth something. And okay, maybe I got to turn it this way, I got to turn it that way. Maybe you need to breathe this way, you need to breathe that way, because we're trying to birth this thing into the world, and just what the power of that is. So it isn't a thing of I'm trying to compete with you. I really want to help you to bring forth new life, new literary life, so to speak.
And I think Gail Jones is probably the best example of that. Morrison was prone to hyperbole when she wanted to sell, a book, right? So she did say to her editor, I just read this new writer, and after I finished reading her manuscript, I was just left green with envy. So she's like, how could this person possibly exist with Gail Jones? Now, the envy is feigned, clearly, because she knows that they are doing similar kinds of work, but she is also like Gail Jones's biggest supporter.
Yes.
So she's not at all concerned like, oh, wow, here's this young girl who's going to come and bypass me. She's doing a similar kind of thing that I'm doing. It is, nope, every opportunity I get to promote Gail Jones's work, I will, in part because Authors sell books. The books won't sell
Right.
themselves. But
Right.
Gail Jones refused to do press.
Yes. And I've
So
noticed that
Morrison had to do
even
it.
still
Even
now
now,
today, still
even
today,
now. There
that
were a
hasn't
few
changed.
exceptions. Everyone who was alive, I can't say everyone. My mother would chastise me for saying, because I used to say, for instance, like I made all A's and a B, and she's like, "You made a B, you didn't make all A's. You made 5 A's and 1 B. All means all, so I won't say every."
Right.
There were 2 writers who were living that I didn't get a chance to talk to, but with those 2 exceptions, I talked to every other living person that Morrison edited, and Gail Jones was one of them. I just couldn't make the point of contact. Wesley Brown, actually, so there's 3. Nettie Jones, more recently has surfaced, and there's actually been a reissue of Nettie Jones's Fishtails, and I think on the cover is as edited by Toni Morrison.
Okay.
But Gail Jones just continues to be prolific in her work, but also a recluse. And very few people have the luxury of not doing press and still being able to sell their books fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that she was able to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Finish your thought.
The reason that Jones was able to do so well is because Morrison essentially promoted her.
Yes.
And Morrison would, she would do press for Sula, Song of Solomon, whatever she was working on. And at the same time, she would do press for Gail Jones. When people were asking her to write for them because she had a new book coming out, she would say, "All right, and I'm going to talk about Gail Jones."
Right.
So there was never a situation where she thought the writers that she was editing were threats. She didn't ever see them as threats to her. She saw it as like one and the same. And in part, like in talking to her, part of what she was also clear about was she didn't believe in that there could only be one thing. And she had no interest in being the only anything.
Right. Right. Just like you read more than one book, you listen to more than one album. Back in the day when we listened to albums.
Yeah.
You eat more than one meal. So there's definitely room. And really understanding the fact that we see a lot more Black authors now, right? More publishing houses, all of that, independent, all of that. At the time that we're talking about, you weren't seeing as many. There weren't as many avenues. So the whole idea was to be able to get as many stories out as possible.
Yep. Otherwise, like, why be bothered? Like, why do this work? If you are only going to just do what everybody else is doing, what's the point? Right. Like, at that point, she really could have raised their kids, written her books, taught her classes, and gone home. Like, there was no point in doing the editorship if she wasn't going to provide the opportunity for those books that wouldn't otherwise have seen the light of day to get out.
Right. And, and again, just thinking back to the promotional piece, there's so much that's involved with that. Like nowadays, people will say, oh, you need to have a digital imprint. You need to have this, certain things that you need to have to even get picked up. And so, same then, it might not have been a digital footprint, but there had to be ways to promote these books. Now, just going to do a quick sidebar. We can get back into a couple of the other women writers. I found it very interesting when talking about the Black books specifically, how there was like radio programming and all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, at this time he wasn't, known in the way that he is today, but Bill Cosby was doing promotional things to help sell the book on the radio and stuff like that. I can't even imagine that now.
But she was clear. And, that was her kind of breakout book, if you will. That was her book where she was like, I'm sick of this conversation that I can't sell books across both sides of the street, which basically meant like white people don't buy books. I mean, Black people don't buy books and white people won't buy books by Black authors. She's like, I'm sick of it. Let's end it. So she pulled out all of the stops, making it, an event and saying, I'm going to do this book and I need a big name. And that kind of correspondence just showed her bravado. She was basically like, listen, you don't know me from Adam, but here's why I think you need to do this book. And at the time he had all these educational programs, all of the educational programming going on, was slated to be co-host or guest host, on Johnny Carson. She had Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, everybody who was anybody, just really trying to make an event out of the Black book, which worked really well because the book is still in print today.
it's just something just to think about that. I can't imagine like Beyonce is going to get on and sell your book for you.
That's right. And also, like, you know, to go, like, it's in those moments that you also see her notes around, here are the Black bookstores.
Right.
Here are like the Black critics and the Black reviewers. Here are the, like, all the Black spaces, where she essentially had to build that from scratch because they didn't have it. So she had to figure out, like, how do I make sure that I get this in all the places, because she knew the sales team had severe limitations,
right,
in terms of what they knew. Yep.
Right.
So and getting on the radio was like, gotta do it.
Right. And I'm just thinking about what you just said. That still exists today, because I have some friends, you know, some people that I've interviewed that have become friends, and they say, you know, if depending on who their publisher is, they're not going to go to the Black bookstores, you know, or they think they're not, or if they're doing a book tour, they're not going to book them at the Black bookstores, and just certain things that aren't happening. They don't even think to do it. So the author does really have to be hands-on in making sure that it reaches the people that they want the books to reach.
And if you don't, I mean, it happened that I knew, because I was working on a book on publishing, right? I knew that that was something that I needed to do. But if you don't, if you're just listening to and trusting your publisher, and you absolutely should trust your publisher, but if you don't know that your publisher doesn't know that, you don't even know to say, hey, here are the choices we're going to make. Here are the places that we're going to go. So for me, I thought, with the DC launch, I absolutely want a Black bookstore, because if I'm going to sell 150 books anywhere, I want that Black bookstore to sell 150. When it was time to go to Atlanta, it was the same thing. Like, I'll go to Auburn Avenue Library, but I got to have a Black bookseller. And the young lady is a couple and a daughter. One young lady who had gone to Howard, graduated from Howard, 44th and 3rd, and like just the conversation after, where I was just like deeply appreciative. Thank you for, like, you know, being here and making sure that it was a beautiful event. And the reality for her that she helped me to think about, she's like, I sold more books tonight than I would have in a week. And that's the work that you have to do for Black bookstores. Like, I have a captive audience here. Like, I would not have sold 150 books in a day otherwise. So no, thank you. And I was like, all right, so this is a mutually, like, just productive reciprocal relationship. Right.
And that's so important. And I am here in Atlanta. Unfortunately, I missed your event, but next time I'll be sure.
Yes.
But yes,
and 44th and 3rd is still there. And there are a number. Like Atlanta, you have the good fortune.
Yes, we have a bunch.
Many bookstores.
We have many. Now, we briefly mentioned Barbara Chase Revolt. I might be saying the last name wrong, but that was an interesting relationship.
To say the least. And it was the kind of classic, like, run up on someone. Part of Morrison did not have a whole list of people that she was working with. She was a new editor, so she didn't have like a Rolodex of people that she's like, when I get a chance, I'm going to edit this person. So she had to go out and find people. So she's at this party, and somebody introduces her to Barbara Chase Revolt, and they said, oh, she's written a collection of poems. Now, she's fairly well known as a sculptor, had been on Ebony as a young person, had been, you know, in Paris, really on the scene for sculpting. And so Morrison kind of casually agrees, like, all right, send me the poems. I'll read them. I like them. And so they strike up this relationship. They are in France, rather. Chase Revolt's boys and Toni Morrison's boys, they work on the poems together, and they get back and they have this, you know, really good working, like, hey, send me that Louis Vuitton wallet when you get it the next time you go to the store. And then it falls apart, you know? Where Barbara Chase Revolt's like, I don't want this book promoted in this way. And the thing that really, I think, ticked Morrison off more often than not was she kept saying, the people here. Meaning
not listening to that.
The people here think, well, everyone here says, and so Morrison finally says, did it ever occur to you that the people you're talking about want your book to fail? Like, let's think about whether or not they really are on Team Barbara. And Chase Rabeau sends her, pictures for promotional work, understands that she has to do the promotional work. And then when she gets the cover and she sees that Morrison has used a picture of her for the front and the back, and she says, absolutely not. I don't want these pictures. Like, why in the world would you do that? It's like Hollywood sensationalized. It's, look, another Black girl. And Morrison writes her back like, why would you send us 34 pictures if you didn't intend for us
You don't
to
want to
read
use them.
Yeah, I'm like, what are you doing? And then, it just got progressively more heated. And because an editor has to be enthusiastic and completely behind a book, when that tension was so thick between them, all of the avenues for that book to do well kind of just dissipate, because Morrison would have had to do double work to make sure that somehow she could get a lot of energy for the book. And Chase Rabeau wasn't interested in doing the work that was necessary to do it. And she was the only selling point for the book.
Right.
She's like, that only works.
Was.
Yeah, exactly.
Was and wanted to see another element of her creativity. So,
absolutely. Yeah. She's like, that would have only worked if you were an established poet. You're not. So it did prove to be interesting. And I talked to Barbara Chase Rabeau about it and had a really good conversation with her.
Yes.
And just sharing some of the correspondence. And she was like, oh, like I was young. And she's like, and the reality is, like, I didn't know what I was doing. And I was listening to so many people. And she's like, but at the end of the day, like, I just didn't know how else to handle it. And of course, Barbara Chase Rabeau goes on to write Sally Hemings, again, a book that predates all of our affirmations around the speculation around, like, it's before Annette Gordon Reed's research, published research on Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson. But she and Morrison begin to try to work on that. And Chase Rabeau wants to do it as like a kind of narrative epic poem. And Morrison saying, no, this is the narrative. And finally, Chase Rabeau shifts it to a narrative. But at that point, Morrison's not really not willing to work with her about it anymore, because, there's a hard-headedness that, like, Morrison just wouldn't suffer.
Right. I mean, I guess I can understand it, because she's got it going on outside of this. And at a certain point, she stops editing to focus more just on her own work. But and even in telling that story, they still had maintained some type of relationship. They may have never worked together again.
But yeah.
So
they need to be friends.
Yes, and I mean that speaks volumes as well, because in a lot of situations, people would just, I'm through with you, I'm not dealing with you at all. So that just shows a lot about Toni Morrison's character. We are actually getting close to time, but I do want to mention, because we haven't talked about either of them yet, Lucille Clifton, because we're in the poet realm right now, poetry realm. Lucille Clifton, who many of us love, that her work with Lucille Clifton. Start with her.
I just love everything about Lucille Clifton. So it was a real treat to learn that Toni Morrison edited Lucille Clifton, just because it gave me an excuse to read Lucille Clifton even more and more closely. She had been at Random House for some time, and two of her editors had left, and Morrison becomes her editor for two books. One, a collection of poems, and then the other, the memoir. And I think that it is her work with Morrison that really gives her the courage to do the memoir, because she had said before that she wanted to do it. She said, but it's just too hard. Essentially, like, how do I take my insides out, take a look at them, and then put them back in, when all I do all day, every day is try to keep my insides in.
Right.
And even that language, even that correspondence, I was just like, oh my gosh, the beauty of the metaphor there. But fortunately, her work with Morrison, who is like really enthusiastic as soon as she hears about the idea for Generation, that enthusiasm gives Clifton the energy that she needs to get Generations done. And then there was just such a beautiful, like, exchange around the poems and the way that the poems worked and how they worked. And for the, like, 90%, if not a little bit higher than 90% of the recommendations that Morrison made around Clifton for her poems, Clifton would take that advice. And Morrison wasn't a poet, so she wasn't super heavy-handed, but she would tell her things like, we're not going to name this poem The Black Woman because there are 800 Black women poems in the world.
Right.
Like, let's not do that. Let's name it something else because yours will be like one of another Black women poems. And then there is a moment that, a poem called Miss Anne, which is a kind of stand-in for all white women who have interacted with Black women without really regarding them, without acknowledging, like almost the kind of opposite or similar kind of thing as Invisible Man. They've interacted with Black women without knowing them or seeing them.
Right.
And that poem has its own power. Clifton had, included a little stanza about the way that, it's Black women who spit on a little Black girl in Little Rock. And Morrison says, let's take that out because it locks the poem in a particular kind of time. Right. All of the other verbs are powerful. Spit is not, right. Like that's not a powerful word. And you do the work of the poem without trapping our imagination into a locked in time. And Clifton agreed. And made the adjustment. So it was like kind of conceptual more than craft.
Right.
But a beautiful friendship as well.
Yes. And last but definitely not least, June Jordan.
That one was interesting and intense at times, but I appreciated the way that they were able to work it out. Now they're both in the same city, which was very interesting to me. Like as a person who's in the archive, as a researcher, you're hoping always that there's correspondence. But when people are in the same city, typically there's not. So then you're like really panicking because they're having conversations in person. But here they are, both like in two different boroughs, but still in the same city, writing these letters back and forth because they don't have a really good working relationship and they don't know each other.
Right.
And I think there was too much pride on both of their parts that got in the way because at that point they were both pretty established. But they end up working it out to the point where they can get one book done, Things That I Do in the Dark, but their relationship is never one of those kind of warm and fuzzies to the point that Morrison wants to continue to work with her or June Jordan wants to continue to work with Morrison. But even so, she's like, June, I think the work that you're doing is really beautiful and important. Like, keep it up. Like, just somewhere else.
Yeah, and not with me. Oh, goodness. But I just really enjoyed reading this book. And again, I thank you because it was, we're talking about the women because, that's our focus in this space. But, just all of the different people that Toni Morrison had a chance to work with. That literary community that she was able to build, even with some women that she didn't work with, just that whole sisterhood. We've seen photos, here and there that pop up of some of the people that she might have been in community with, and just really seeing how all of those things converge together, and also just looking at how things have changed. Yes, we have like book talkers and, all these different things that we see a lot of books, but we don't necessarily have the same literary journals or, Essence doesn't necessarily share, stories in the way that they used to, or, share sections of a book. There are just some things that we don't see anymore that we saw more of during that time that Toni was coming up and, being an editor and the days of her books. So it's just interesting to see where we were, where we are now. And I guess my last question to you, just thinking about Toni and her work and the whole thing of iconic Black women writers, what is something that you would like to see as women continue to write and tell stories in kind of in honor of the stage that was set by us by Toni Morrison?
I think I was thinking about this even as you were talking about the things that we don't have, but we do have like places like Brown Girl Collective. So what I would like to see more of is really more support of and engagement with the spaces that we curate and create for ourselves, because part of what I start with and end with this book is the reading audience should dictate what we get, what comes to the shelf, what gets published, because we have the power You know, she describes, like, she tells this story, like she said, we might not have this, and this, but what we have is ourselves. We all we got, and that's more than enough. So I'd love to see more support for those spaces that do exist. The sharing out, I was excited. Like, I can't tell you, I did an event at Barnes and Noble yesterday, and something like early in the weekend, people were saying, oh, I was mistakenly, there's like, oh, you're going to be, you have an event this week. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing like this event, like Sunday. And I thought they were talking about it in person. They were like, no, we talking about Brown Girl, the book collective, or the book club. So I'm excited when people share. So the work that we have to do ourselves is share out all of the spaces that we have created for ourselves with other people and support that. That's independent Black media, that's independent Black publishing, that's independent spaces like this. Like, how do we curate spaces for ourselves and tell the stories that we want to tell and build power that is collaborative power, that is power that's rooted in this notion that there is abundance, not scarcity. Like, there's enough space for everybody.
That part, that last thing you just said, there's enough for everybody.
Absolutely.
Because I think sometimes we lose sight of that, that there is enough for everybody. So thank you for saying that and for sharing that, and thank you to the people out there who said that they knew that you were going to be here, because I find that pretty exciting just for me.
Yes.
To know that the work and the conversations are resonating with people so much so that they want to be a part of them, whether they're in the room live, and there are people in the room, they don't always have something to say, but you know, whether you're live or they come back and watch later, share it out. Because one thing I have found is that there might be somebody I talked to 3 years ago, and somebody reads that book and they discover the conversation. So
I can't tell you how many times I've done something like that. Yes. Where I find it, because I'm usually late reading a book, right? And then I go and I read them, like, oh, let me see what this person had to say. And then I'm like, oh, this interview is 3 years old. Like, where was I? I was under a rock. Well, I mean, I wasn't really, I was just busy. So you're right. 3 years later, people are engaging. So even if people aren't in spaces live, coming back into them whenever they get to it and then sharing it out is a really, really wonderful opportunity. And I imagine that the work that you do too is a labor of love, because you have to set up, you gotta like run it, you gotta book, then you have to stream and publish. So I'm just saying, like, it's kudos that we should not take for granted. And there are a lot of spaces like this and room for all of it. And that's like reading what's in essence, reading the Hurston, like what the Hurston Wright Foundation, like I'm that person. This time of year, I'm so happy. And I was telling my team at HarperCollins, I'm Amistad HarperCollins, like I'm completely fascinated by the best of things that the book is getting. So it's like in Oprah Daly's best books of 2025, NPR's best of 2025. Like I was just like, this is so fascinating, because I'm that person who would like look at different spaces and say, all right, it's book buying time for me. Like it's a holiday season. What gifts am I going to get? So it didn't occur to me that this book would be a part of that conversation.
Yes.
So it's really cute. I'm just like, this is exciting. I know we go to all of these spaces to figure out like, what are we going to read next? And how do we get like little teasers for it? And we're always trying to build new audiences. So I appreciate it and appreciate like all of the viewers. Hey, Camille.
Yes, I'm going to put these up so you can see. So great that you've done this research and shared Morrison's non-HU history with the serious reading world. Kudos. Yes.
Yep.
I like this one. What's that? Gumbo Arts. Okay, Gumbo. I absolutely love this book. Professor Williams, Toni Morrison, has long been my absolute favorite author. I was fascinated by the depth and breadth of her, that's hard to say fast, of her work as an editor.
I'm from Louisiana too, so I don't know who Gumbo Arts is, but I'm with you.
Those words are hard to say. Together, yes, they are. But yes, you know, again, I really, really, like, hey, back, yes. Well, please return to Philly, okay?
Yeah, I do have to get back to Philly. I did something at UPenn, but I'm going to try to get to one of the bookstores sooner than later.
Yes, yes, and it's good, you know. So I know we're up into the holiday season now. Are there any places that you already have planned that you're going to be in the weeks ahead or after the holidays that people can come out and see you that you know of? If not, you know, people can follow on social and find out.
Following on social would be great. I'm doing Art Basel in Miami. I'm really excited just to be at Art Basel. That's another one of those moments where I was like, oh, I'm going to Art Basel. Oh, geez, like me, like work there. I'm telling you, there's this out of person experience where I'm like, I'm just excited to go somewhere. And then when I get an event there, I'm like, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So on Friday, but this has been the busiest probably 14 weeks of my life. I did 11 weeks in a row of events. So this would be like my incentive or like encouraged to like visit the website. Most of the things that I've done, if they were recorded, I post them there. So like go back and view those things because your girl is tired. I don't have anything else after. Like I'm trying to like do holiday family time. And then I'll pick up Jackson State in Jackson, Mississippi in February. I do Toronto in February. I'll do Sankofa actually in DC in December. And then I have something in Little Rock that I don't have the date confirmed for. So yep, everything's on like the website. Like I'm 53, I think, or 53. At a certain point you don't remember your age, right? Which also means that I'm more website oriented. Like I am on top of the website. My social media is borderline like a 75-year-old. Like I have somebody helping me with my social. So if you want to know where I am, follow the website because that's always up to date. I do the best I can on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful website. So y'all, you want to go there and see the pictures and the layout and all of that. So definitely do that. I don't know, you might have missed this, but say basically come back to Atlanta. I agree because that's where I am. And that way I can get a chance to.
All right, we'll have to work it out. Come on, I got like Atlanta. Atlanta was my favorite event. I'm no exaggeration.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to say anything. It's black.
All the world. There were Clark folks, Morehouse folks, Spelman folks, Grambling folks, like some of my line sisters, like AKAs everywhere, Howard folks. It was just like lovely. It was just all the things.
Yeah. People converge in Atlanta. I mean, it is what it is. So, and just last thing I want to say to your point about the different things that people are doing, the end of year wrap ups and things like that. Within the next 36 hours, I will be putting up my end of year wrap up, which really in the case of what I do here, it's similar to what happens like with Goodreads where people get to vote. So it would be like the best books of 2025 in a variety of categories. Of course, yours is going to be in there. Yes, yours will definitely be included in the ones and people get
shameless plug.
Yeah, the audience actually gets to vote. And then I already know the date on the December 17th, which is a Wednesday. I will come on live and announce who those people are who win in those categories. And instead of me doing one person, it's called a winner's circle. So like the top 3 votes. Because I'm like, hey, more than one person. Because again, there's enough for everybody, right? So 3 people get an opportunity to have their books listed out in that winner's circle for the year. So y'all look for that within the next 36 hours. I'll have that where you can start voting and you'll have about a couple weeks to vote for that. So thank you so much for being with us. I know we've gone a few minutes over. I appreciate your time. If you don't mind, don't hang up yet. I'm going to let you grab that water that you probably want to get now, and I'll be with you in just a second. Let's have a couple of announcements.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank you again. All right. I enjoyed so much having that conversation with Dean Dana A. Williams. It's that book. I loved reading it. And actually I listened to some of it as well. So it is available on audio for those who like to do audio. But if you don't have a copy yet, or you're looking to get copies, it is available at the Brown Girl Collective Bookstore, which is just that, Brown Girl Collective Bookstore. bookshop.com, and that's affiliated with Bookshop, which also supports independent booksellers. So if you're looking at getting a copy or maybe purchasing additional copies for others who may want to read the book, that's a space where you can go and get it. I would encourage you to pick it up either there or wherever books are sold and you like to shop. So just as means of other announcements, on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, which is December the 3rd, I will be talking about Black capitalists with Rachel Laria. So look for that on Wednesday coming up. We're going to be talking about Black capitalists. There's been a lot of talk and sometimes controversy about what it means to be Black and a capitalist. So we'll be having that conversation on Wednesday. Then a week from today, we'll be talking to Aaron Crosby Eckstein about Junie, which is another one of those books that's been on the top seller list of the year. And well, the last one I'm going to announce for now will be next Wednesday. We will be talking with Tara Pringle Jefferson about Bloom How You Must, A Black Woman's Guide to Self-Care and Generational Healing. This book actually comes out tomorrow. I have an advanced copy because actually I was one of the people she interviewed for the book. So I'm looking forward to talking to her on December the 10th. This will definitely be a good book for those who are looking at practicing self-care. So that's all I have for me by means of announcements for now. Thank you again for being here tonight, and I look forward to seeing you over the next couple of weeks. Between now and the time I take a little break for the holiday as well. So thanks again for being here, everyone. Take good care, and we will see you real soon. Bye-bye.